Welcome to another edition of the Mail Time Podcast. I'm joined this evening by IDF Paratrooper in Reserve, Sam Freed. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, for those who are unfamiliar with your story, can you give us a quick synopsis of who you are, how you ended up in the IDF, and what you were doing just prior to and after October 7th?
Yeah, absolutely. So, pretty much grew up in New York my whole life. Always wanted to join the IDF, and after I finished college, I drafted in March of 2020. Drafted to the Paratroopers, the 890th Battalion. Served until March of 2022. Came back to America, started my career in finance, and then obviously October 7th happens, shakes up everything. 5 days after, I went back. I rejoined my team as a first sergeant, so I had a squadron below me, and I was a sharpshooter during the war. We started out in the north. We end up doing a bunch of missions in Judea, Samaria, and then we get sent into Gaza. Do about 2 months in Gaza, a whole bunch of different places in Sajia, Khan Yunis, Netzarim, and we end up finishing up. And I come back home, and brings me to a whole different type of battlefield, which is the ideological one. And I've been going around the country and speaking a whole bunch of different events. Even yesterday, or Sunday rather, I was in Ohio speaking at a church. And so I've been going around trying to, have dialogue for peace and humanizing the IDF while also trying to empower the Jewish community and our allies.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, there's plenty.
We could sit here and talk for 17 hours and we
I'm
still
sure.
wouldn't have enough. You mentioned a few places that you fought, and now the IDF has given up most of those areas, and they are allowing residents to return to the northern part of the Gaza Strip. As someone who fought and risked his life and potentially could have been killed trying to conquer those areas and help achieve victory for the IDF, what are your thoughts when you see the images of Gazans returning to the north?
Yeah, I mean that's a terrific question, and I think you ask 1,000 people, you'll get probably 3,000 answers when it comes to this kind of thing. Because on one hand, if anybody is going to be the one to feel something about this, it's going to be soldiers who lost friends and were shot at and were attacked and ambushed and everything. And so it is very difficult on one hand to think like, okay, we spent all this time and all this effort on trying to clear this area of terrorists. Now the terrorists are just going back to the area. It's kind of like how we felt during the first wave of the war when we had the ceasefire in, I forget what month it was, maybe November.
November, right.
Yeah, and it was the same kind of thing. We had taken over this area in Gaza. We had that like week or whatever it was, 10-day ceasefire, and then they said, okay, we have to go back in and retake over that entire area because the terrorists had replanted bombs and re-rigged things with explosives. And so it's like, well, what are we doing here? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And I don't think that anybody, when you talk about running to Israel after October 7th, I don't think that you were sitting there and saying, well, let me evaluate the war aims that have been established by the political echelon of Israel. That certainly is not what you were looking at, but you did just put so much time and effort into it, and there was an understanding over time of what you were trying to do. But
Yeah,
did you feel that the war aims were seen in the field as well?
I
Like, did
think
you
it's a
feel like you were trying to eliminate Hamas?
Yeah, so that's a terrific question. And I think what people hear on the outside and what you hear on the inside in the army are very different things. And obviously, this is only speaking from my experience. And I'm not sure that this is like something that is going to be loved by everybody, but I think it is very important. Is that before we went into Gaza, we were told the assumption is fighting combat in Gaza, unless we are told otherwise by intelligence, that there are no hostages left. Let's just assume that going in, right? We cannot operate and properly take over areas in Gaza if every single room we go into, we're thinking there's going to be a hostage in this room, right? We have to assume that there are only terrorists where we are because A, there are no civilians left because we've either escorted them out or they've fled, or B, if we know that we're in an area which might have terrorists, which generally we were, it's dangerous for the team to be thinking, okay, well, maybe there are terrorists and maybe there are hostages in this house, so let's proceed with caution. And obviously, there's like this little idea in the back of your head, like, okay, you go into a room, you never know what you're gonna find. Yes, we found, whether it was clothing belonging to hostages or a soldier's army ID in different places, or bags with Hebrew writing on them that belonged to the hostages from Nova. But you can't operate with this idea that everybody else in Israel views, which is like, number one thing is get the hostages back. Yes, we all want the hostages back. Nobody's arguing that. But in order to maintain and uphold the security of Israel, in my view, the number one aim has to be destroying Hamas and dismantling Hamas, which we've done an incredible job at, right? I mean, people are saying, how is it possible that there's still Hamas terrorists? How is it possible that all these people are wearing the green bandanas during the exchanges? And it's like, okay, well, you have to understand that when we're in Gaza, not a single person is wearing those bandanas. Not a single person looks like they're even in the military at all. We are fighting against what look like civilians with guns. And to all those people who are out there wearing their bandanas, I mean, they're such cowards, because it's like, where were you being proud to be part of Hamas when we were fighting against you? No, what were you doing? You look like the your
Yeah, they're
regular
wearing Adidas
teenager.
tracksuits,
Exactly.
and they
Exactly.
look like they could cry on Instagram saying that you just
Exactly.
slaughtered their innocent mother, and that's what's going
Exactly.
on. But look, I want to get into the mindset of you and your team that spent so much time there. Do you feel that as a result of this ceasefire now for 42 days, that the number of people that would show up if you were called to go back to Gaza would decrease because people see that perhaps they're fighting for something that ultimately is just going to be given right back to Hamas?
Look, that's a
And by
tough
the
one.
way, I only ask the hard questions here, so I'm not interested in the fluffy
No,
stuff.
no,
So I'm
I
asking,
totally
and I think,
respect.
and that's the goal of this podcast, because I'm trying to present ideas, whether I agree with them or not, in a real way, instead of this Hasbara, like, oh my God, Sam, you're the most brave human being I've ever seen. Which, by the way, you're tremendously brave.
Oh, stop it, stop it.
Um,
Let's get to the question. You ready? I got you. I really think this. I think in the end of the day, it hurts the morale of the Israeli people to know that terrorists who committed heinous acts, you're talking about the Fogel family murder, like, that terrorist is now free. Talking about the guy who killed Ari Fold, that terrorist is now free. You're talking about people who are genuinely awful human beings are now free, and that itself is enough for probably a lot of Israelis to lose confidence in the government. However, with a caveat, right? I do think that given the pressure from the Trump administration, given the pressure from the Israeli public to get the hostages home, unfortunately, there is no way we were getting the hostages back without a deal. And Hamas has all the leverage, right? We have zero leverage in this. We can destroy them and threaten them and do whatever it is, but like, in the end of the day, if they say we want X amount of people per hostage, we have to capitulate.
Well, so Hezi Nachama was on my show earlier this week, and he was of the opinion if they'd instituted what's been known as the General's Plan, and they'd actually just laid siege to northern Gaza and to Hamas, that perhaps there would have been a different outcome because he would have forced it. But I think we can all agree that whether or not that would have happened or not, as a result of that plan, the leadership of the army was not ready to do that. So therefore,
Beyond that, then Hamas could just say, all right, you want to play that game? Let's play this game. For every one day that you lay siege, we kill one hostage.
right, but in the end of have as it's presented right now, through the deal, we've now basically given them an incentive, in my opinion, to never give up
Commit
all the
terror.
hostages. So it's
Yeah.
going to require military force.
And by the way, we are in a very, very losing position no matter what we do. And I always say, and I've said it since day one of the war, if we had an administration in America at the time who's truly supportive of Israel, and I'm not saying necessarily Trump, I'm saying anybody, could have been Biden, who at the time, on October 7th or October 8th, 2023, put their knee on the neck of Qatar and Iran and said, give us back every single hostage today. Literally, you have 24 hours, or else we sanction you until you cannot get out of this pit for the next 50 years. I'm telling you right now, we would have had the hostages home. Unfortunately, that leverage was not put out there. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And as a result, we are going to have to deal with this later on. And this is going to be dealt with, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. Some terrorist is going to do another crazy set of attacks that's probably going to end up leaving, I don't know, let's just say it's probably not going to be the 1,200, thank God, that were killed, God forbid that were killed on October 7th, but it's going to be 20. And then the next one will be 10. The next one will be 5. And then over 20 years, yeah, you end up at that 1,000 number, It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And then you look at soldiers, and it's like, okay, well, 800 soldiers were killed, over 800, I don't know exactly what the number is, but 860, something like that, soldiers were killed since the beginning of the war. And it's like, okay, well, at what point is how many civilian lives is equal to one soldier life, right? And you start playing that game, and it gets very difficult. And I think that that's kind of where the question that you asked before comes into play, where it's, all right, well, as a soldier, do I feel like, is my life worth anything for the Israeli army? Do they view me as, what if I get kidnapped in the middle of Gaza? Are they going to start trying to get me back? Before, after, I don't know. But it's really difficult. And I think each Israeli will probably tell you something different. But I think by and large, most Israelis understand that this is so different than anything else that we've ever been through. Probably one of the most complex, if not the most complex hostage situation ever. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's well, so uh, it's obviously a lose-lose situation, and of course, we're very, very happy every single time a hostage is returned, whether or not they are alive or deceased. We're still happy there's a conclusion. Obviously, we'd prefer that the hostage comes back alive. My heart goes out to Hadar Golden's family, who've been in this turmoil for 11 years,
Yeah,
and it's really terrible. I just am concerned by the concept that when we set out to destroy Hamas and we don't do that, and we have clear bipartisan war aims from Benny Gantz, Yoav Gallant, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Gadi Eisenkot voted and agreed upon about aim of the war, the total destruction of Hamas, and we don't deliver that. And you have people that sacrificed their lives or 400 days of their life, and they, thank God, returned home. 200, 350. Their people are putting a lot of time in to achieving these goals and aims. And if there ever was an opportunity to do it, this was it. And that concept that we wouldn't have finished it once and for all, and instead now it seems that you're going to be pushing a lot of these issues down the road a bit is challenging. And I don't even believe that it's a done deal that all of the hostages will come out in this deal. So
I agree
it's
with
one thing if you said it was an all at once thing, and then okay, you're going to resume perhaps, or you see what happens. But this is a very different situation, so it's challenging to really internalize that. And when you talk about soldier lives, it's very hard for me as someone who's been trying to help soldiers to reconcile the complete lack of preparedness from the ground forces with that concept that every soldier's life is extremely important. And I can perhaps say certain things because I'm not in the army, but the idea that people would be sent in with expired ceramic plates or missing night vision or helmets from 1978 or trucks that are falling apart and stopping and stalling and tanks that are broke, that is hard for me to understand. And I know that the army didn't anticipate having to fight a war like this, but it's still hard for me to reconcile the concept of putting an absolute value on human life, specifically the soldiers' lives, and exposing them to unnecessary danger. And
Yeah, and
you,
by the
yeah,
way, I just want to add thank you for everything that you're doing. I mean, the amount of effort and work and time and money and resources that you have put into this and protecting soldiers' lives, literally saving lives, is tremendous.
Well,
So
why is it?
God bless
Well,
you.
I appreciate it, and I'll accept the compliment. Thank you for your kind words. Why is that coming from outside of the army and not within the
Yeah,
army?
I mean that's just like an Israeli preparedness thing. I've heard everything that you've heard, and you've probably heard worse excuses than I have, right? For me, I mean, I remember the first time we went into Gaza, there were some kids who were going in without scopes, and it's like, how are you going into Gaza without even a dot? Like you're like this isn't 1980s Vietnam. We're a proper military. We're considered one of the strongest militaries in the world. That's just unacceptable. But eventually we did end up getting everything that we needed, and a lot of that ended up coming from people sourcing on their own, right?
Right. So,
um
what percent would you say? And the soldiers I've had on the show, I've asked, what percent of essential gear would you say was donated in your unit?
by
And
essential, do you mean
donated
plates,
includes
helmets?
donated includes purchased by the individual soldier or their family or from a nonprofit that's helping, from helmets, vests, tactical uniforms that are fireproof or fire resistant, scopes, night vision, and drones. What percent would you say roughly was donated versus provided by the army?
I'm scared to throw a number out there, but if I had to, I would say something astronomical. I would say between, for reserves, way higher than regular,
Yeah,
but
but
I
your
would say,
unit.
yeah, I'd say probably like 60%.
And that seems pretty low to me, actually. That would put you in a good camp.
Yeah, I would say, look, thank God we had like stuff, but a good amount had to be donated.
It's kind of scary, no?
No, more than scary, and unacceptable, right? And I'm not here disparaging the IDF and saying that they don't care about us. I'm saying this needs to be done better, and it's a very clear issue that we have, right? This is beyond mistake. This is unpreparedness that,
Wait, but I want to push you. I want to push you on the not caring thing because it's important, and I'm trying to understand it. So I'm asking, actually, for my personal knowledge, even more than the listeners right now. The reason I mentioned the not caring, and it's always a fine line, is yes, someone could tell you that they care about you, but if they are consistently forcing you to drive a car that doesn't have a seatbelt, as an example, or you're going 120 miles an hour down the highway with no steering wheel, then you could challenge if the person really cares about you. So I'm wondering how you reconcile the idea that you'd have to get 60% of your gear donated and them caring about you in the way that they should. Because at some point, doesn't the actions speak louder than the words?
I hear you. Yeah, it's a good question. Probably something I need to sit with a little bit more. But I
And
think
I'm not, and again, the last thing I ever want to do is disparage the army or the intentions. It's just
yeah.
at some point,
No, I hear you.
when is it
I I think that the bigger
the limit?
issue lies in the fact that, in part, right, bureaucracy in Israel is just simply inefficient. And I'm sure, I'm positive, by the way, that there probably was a way for Israel to get this done in a timely and efficient manner. They just kept saying, when we need it, we'll get it done. Or they kept saying, you know what? Whatever. Like they said, well, somebody else will do it, right? Like, God, what do I need to do? Like, this is my job is XYZ, not XYZ plus somebody else's ABC, right? And so it's very much like a culture thing of I'm not saying all Israelis, but like just throwing the responsibility to somebody else, because you think about it, the army by and large is not run by professionals, right? We're not a professional army, we're a mandatory army, meaning the people are 19, 20, 21 year olds are 90% of the people that you're interacting with in the army. Then you have the professional soldiers who are staying in for a longer period of time. But even them, there's such a few number of them compared to the majority of the army that it's like, even if you wanted to get a massive thing like this done, it would take years, right? And upgrading the equipment for, again, I think reserves is very different than regular army. Regular army had most of the stuff they needed and didn't need people to donate by and large. I think when it comes to reserves, you're in a very different situation because A, the IDF didn't know exactly how many reservists were going to come. B, there was a point at the beginning of the war where they were turning a lot of people away. A lot of my friends who were trying to get back in were like being told no. People who were on my team with me in my regular service were being told like, we don't have a spot for you. We don't even have a gun to give you because we have so many people coming. And so at that point, it's like the IDF is then also thinking kind of what you were saying before, like, are people going to come back? And maybe after X amount of time in Gaza, they come out and they're like, we don't want to come back. And then it's like, okay, well, now we have room. And now we can allow those other people to filter in. It's, again, this is unprecedented times. And I guess Israel needed to do better and know better. And I guess the whole thing goes back to October 7th in the first place. Like, how did they not know, right? Like, it just seems that's like automatically like a red flag right there. But it's like, okay, they didn't know, just like they weren't prepared with the equipment. It seems like despite that, thank God through miracles. I mean, I heard some estimation, I don't know exactly where I heard it, but at the beginning of the war, they were estimating somewhere between 10 to 12,000 soldiers would get killed in a full-scale ground invasion that we had in Gaza. That was the estimation at the beginning of the war. There's been sub 1,000 soldiers, thank God, killed, right? And I say thank God because it is genuinely miraculous. The amount of crazy things that happened day in, day out. I'm talking, we were ambushed so many times. I have a video on my phone of Hamas ambushing my team and I. And like in their video, they talk about how they killed 4 IDF soldiers. They didn't kill any of us, like by miracles, by such slim chances. And so I think the IDF knows they need to be better. And I mean, the accountability isn't just Herzl Levy who just stepped down, right? The accountability goes towards the highest levels of trying to get all the logistics together. And somebody is going to be answering for that, right?
Oh,
And
you hope.
you hope, but like you also know, right, for people like you who have dedicated their last 15, 16 months to this, I mean, maybe they should be enlisting you to be doing this, right? Like,
Oh yeah. Also, I just want to push back on one thing. You said Sadir. There's a few aspects of this. One, any soldier that was in training that had their training cut short and were put into operation did not get a proper gear automatically because since they're still in Tiranut, when you're in Tiranut, you're not necessarily entitled to better equipment. So there were thousands of soldiers, if not tens of thousands of soldiers, that fell into that category at some point in the war, including some families I'm now in touch with. Their sons died in bad equipment. You also have medics and doctors and logistics, which are not considered combat. So therefore, they were not entitled to upgraded equipment. So the thinking was they're not a combat soldier who's, I guess, on the very front line. So therefore, they're not considered to need that better equipment. So right there, just on the classifications, you're still going to have issues in Sadir. And
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
not to say that it was as bad as the reserves, of course not, but there were still major holes. And you also had story even on October 7th at the Kisufim base. There's one soldier, I'm not sure that the family knows the extent, so I'm not going to mention names, but he actually had given up his ceramic plates several days, if not weeks before, because there weren't enough ceramic plates in the unit. And he was actually shot and killed through the chest and didn't have plates. So it's one of these things where everything's going to have to be investigated. And yeah, I hope that people really are held accountable, and there's ways that systems are improved, because obviously going forward, you have to make sure that these things don't happen again and again.
I think it's beyond accountability at this point, right? I think in most cases, I think when problems like this arise that are so severe and so extreme, you're forced to change, right? Like you have to. And I fully believe like this is beyond 100 people being held accountable and being put in jail, right? This is the army understands at this point we're going to get through this war eventually. It's going to be over, whether that's earlier or later, it's going to end. And after that, they're going to look at everything and be like, okay, this is probably number one or two on the list of what we need to change systematically throughout the army. I'm confident that that will be enacted and that will change because it is just, like you said, it's unacceptable. And of course, I love the IDF and I trust the IDF, but like you said, it is kind of concerning, right? And I'm not going to be a soldier here saying like, oh, like screw the IDF is wrong and this and
No,
that.
God
No,
forbid. Yeah.
I mean,
But
it's
let me
not
say
like,
this too. The other
yeah,
thing is that because of the problems that we have on a global scale when it comes to anti-Semitism and things that you are dealing with in terms of hearts and minds, which is also very important. But because we have those issues, there are so many people that are focused on those issues. So it's very hard to figure out how to properly use social media and the ability to speak to a crowd and shift opinion. It's very hard to discern between the global anti-Semitism and inside the family issues that we still need to figure out. So you might go and speak to 100 communities and equipment might never come up, or the idea that there's a lack, the readiness issues might never come up because you're dealing with very legitimate things as to why there are jihadis at Ohio State trying to boycott Belevachad speeches, right? And those are legitimate things to talk about. And I think that we have to, we're never going to come to a firm conclusion, but it's one of these things that there has to be a better balance, in my opinion, because you have so much focus and attention and work being done on what our enemies think or how they're influencing the marketplace of ideas. And it's equally important that we have a space where we can have a marketplace of ideas for ourselves and kind of tune out the other side, if that makes sense. And it's
yeah, no, I
hard.
think it's important. It's kind of like self-evaluation, right? It's trying to understand where are our parim, as you would say in Hebrew, like where are the things that we're missing and how can we improve them? And I think it's interesting because I've actually argued the opposite in many occasions, where slightly the opposite, in the sense that so much money has been poured into through donations and whatnot, millions and millions and millions of dollars into equipment and into all these different things to help supply soldiers because the need is so great. And then on the side, in these conversations about like, our enemies and how they view us and boycotting Israel and etc. and jihadis at Ohio State, I've always said that there's less, we don't get, there's no like funding in the Hasbara space, right? There's
Whoa,
no
whoa,
like,
whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on, hold on. How much time do you have, by the way? Because I don't want to.
I could go like another 10.
Okay. There is so much money in the Hasbara space. And the problem.
Not in the same way, not in the same way.
Wait, wait,
I'm not
wait, wait.
saying,
Wait,
yeah.
let me. Okay. Wait, finish your thought, and
Yeah,
then I'm
yeah.
going to
My,
put.
my thought is this, right? Everybody says Israel has really poor PR. Everybody says Israel is
Yes, agreed.
losing the PR campaign, right? But the reason is that money is not allocated in probably the ways that you and I are probably differing in how we kind of decide what money allocation looks like. Money is not necessarily being allocated to IDF soldiers to go around the country and speak about why what we're doing is not genocide, right? Money is not being allocated to people who are really, really big in the space at the levels of where that money is going to for equipment and other stuff. Not that I'm not saying that those two things are equal. I'm saying there is this massive, massive, massive outpouring of donations that are going towards equipment. I know several organizations like your own who have been able to amass millions of dollars for incredible equipment to help save lives. That is without a doubt incredible. And I'm super happy that there is space for that and that you've been able to achieve that. I think on the same side, but doing it slightly different, there's this other war, which is the ideological war, in which you're not getting these millions of dollars of donations towards Hasbara specifically, going around the country and speaking. At least I'm not aware of it. If you know of
Okay, so
places where
here,
people
okay,
are getting
here's the
funds,
deal.
love to
You
hear
have
about it.
Stand With Us, you have Camera, you have uh, whether that's the federations or whatever is going on there that are trying to do the quote unquote Hasbara, which I don't even like that word. But if you go to the heart of the matter, I was at the Nova exhibit today in Miami, and shout out to Joe
Yeah.
Teplo,
Joe
awesome guy.
Teplo is number one.
But I have some problems the fact of the matter is, we're sitting here giving PG videos and accounts of what's going on. And yes, there's a burnt out car, and that's dramatic to see. But the other side is sitting there holding a dead baby, saying that when we are trying to, when the Jews are fighting Hamas, this is what they're fighting. They're fighting this dead baby right here. And they're in the morgue running around holding body parts and putting out all this dramatic footage. And then we're sitting here trying to say why we're not committing genocide. So in this case, Hamas, aka the Hitlers of our time, wore GoPro cameras, and we are self-censoring and not actually putting out the hardcore truth about what was going on. There was one soldier who was very involved on October 7th, and I said to him, I want to see every photo you have. And he said, are you sure? You're never going to be able to forget this. It's going to scar you. I said, I want to see it. I need to see evil. I need to see what happened. And I sat there for an hour and went through this stuff. That is not in the news. And when you have these censored videos and photos, how do you expect to compete in the playing field about why we're not committing genocide?
Look, I hear you, but I think a lot of that has to do with the family deciding that they don't want
Oh, wait, there's ways
images of
around this.
their.
Come on, there's ways around it. For example, with AI now, you can recreate certain things that are not identifying. Meaning, if you wanted to say, I'm going to recreate this video, no matter how messed up it is, you can recreate it. You can recreate certain things to avoid to provide enough privacy that it's not traceable to the family. But the whole concept that we're sitting
Then
here
it's like
defending
AI
ourselves.
tampered, and it's like kind of considered it's like that taboo around that kind of thing. It's like, oh, it's edited, so people
Right, but
associate
listen,
editing with immediately being false.
okay, but okay. Then the other thing is, I think the fundamental mistake on October 7th itself was, in terms of the Hasbara type thing, was we sat there, Israel sat there and said, well, there's approximately 1,400. Then it was were killed. Then you're actually adjusting the number down to 1,200. What it should have been was 5 million people Hamas attempted to kill 5 million people today, or however many people ran to bomb shelters, because it was an attempted murder of every single person who ran to a shelter that day. They were trying to kill all of the civilians in Israel. But instead, we're sitting here, oh, was it 1,392 or was it 1,380? Or, oh, actually, it's 1,192. Like, we're focusing on these minute points instead of the grander big picture. We completely surrendered on it. And then when you're going around, most of these events are, and I agree that you can amplify in different ways, but sitting here and taking a video, sitting on the border of Gaza and saying, look how close we are to Khan Yunis, or look at us giving aid trucks or whatever, what the hell is that going to prove?
No, I completely agree with you, and that's why I think when I say Hasbara, I mean there are that I know of at least I could probably name around 20 people off the top of my head who actually know the history, actually know how to speak to the conflict, the current conflict, as well as previous conflicts, how we got here, etc. I'm not saying go and show the aid trucks. Literally nobody in the world cares that there has been 1.26 million tons of aid delivered to Gaza. Nobody cares. It could be 500,000, it could be 1,000. Nobody gives it. Excuse me, I didn't want to curse.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, nobody cares. What needs to happen is people are exactly like you said. People hear the words, the letters IDF, immediately say, "Why are they killing all these children?" And
Wait,
nobody is.
let me add one point here, which is
Yeah,
that the thing about being Jewish people and having a lot of opinions and being outspoken is that it's impossible to herd all of the cats and get everyone on the same page about a unified message and a strategy. So when you hear 10 different Israelis go on television, they might say 10 different things. You could say one person thinks Netanyahu is a criminal, the next person thinks Netanyahu is the coming of Mashiach, the next person thinks Netanyahu is mediocre, but the best we have, the next person thinks that Netanyahu should have retired 10 years ago.
you're
And
not wrong. You're
there's
not
all
wrong.
of these things, right? What do you have when you have the people who hate Israel? Genocide, murder, raping of the land, trying to devastate babies. Okay? They have the same talking points. And it's the exact same thing over and over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And then you have
Yeah.
one person go on TV and respond and say, well, Bibi's judicial reform is really the problem. Actually, it's right-wing Ben Gvir. Actually, it's Lapid. And then the other side goes, genocide, babies, genocide, babies. So it's a very, very crazy,
It's lopsided. It's lopsided. You're
lopsided
absolutely right. And
landscape. And we're
yeah,
also self-censoring for the same reasons that make us great people. The fact that we don't want to just
that's
use
another point.
dead
Exactly.
bodies like that. But
I think, yeah,
it's
I hear
crazy.
you. I hear you. It's a very difficult thing, and I think a big part of it is also we don't have the numbers, right? I mean, they have literally over 1 billion people. We have less than 20 million, and to be fair, we have a lot of people outside of that less than 20 million who do support us and are a silent majority. I think, unfortunately, you're right. Like their talking points are however they can get the world to be emotionally impacted, which is nobody's going to say babies deserve to die, right? Unless they're Jewish babies, of course, and then it's totally fine.
Yeah, they're
But
settlers.
right, exactly. But I think that that's part of the overall issue, right? And what is it? It's since World War II, we have yet to do this, and it is humanizing Jewish people. Every single person, I mean, I was in a cab 3 days ago, and somebody said to me, he's like, man, he was a non-Jewish cab driver, and he said, I've never met a not smart Jew. And it's like, I was like, I know you don't mean to be rude, but like, I hate that. I don't think that that's a good thing to say, and that is, quite frankly, in my opinion, racist. That is anti-Semitic to say that you have never met a not smart Jew, because there's a whole spectrum, right? We have stupid Jews, we have smart Jews, we have people in between, just like we have black Jews, we have white Jews, we have people in between, we have rich Jews, we have poor Jews, we have people in between. We are no different than any other person. The second people decide Jews are above, that means we're already not the underdog. We're already going to be torn down from the top because nobody likes the guy who's favored. Nobody likes the guy who's winning it 100% of the time. And so we are no longer human in the eyes of people because it's like, these are the people. They're too smart. They're too wealthy. They're too innovative. They're too, whatever it is, representative of success. And so therefore, maybe they deserve it, right? It's no different than the healthcare CEO, United Healthcare CEO. Nobody knew anything about this guy, but because he was a CEO of a what's it called, insurance company, boom, he deserves to die. And it's like, you don't even know his name. How do you know? Like, what are his merits that he deserves to die? And so it's so problematic to me. I think beyond that, right? We don't have the numbers. We're not human. And 3 is really just this idea that we don't help ourselves, right? We are scared of, and I don't want to be insensitive at all.
You can
We
be
are
as
scared
insensitive as you
of
want.
the shadow of what the Holocaust looked like. We're scared to be strong. We're scared to be a group of people who, yes, we are Musari. We are the most ethical people. We have done things in this war that nobody else has ever done, but we are scared to be a strong force that you do not F with. We are very scared of that idea. That people should look at us and be like, I don't know if I want to mess with these people. And what I think the Israeli government has done, at least in the last 4 months, 5 months, is they've reinstated this idea of do not F with us diplomacy. But the Jewish people at large have yet to do that. And I'm not advocating for people to bring back the JDL and start beating people up or do crazy things. I'm not saying that that should happen. I am saying, though, deterrence for hate will generally only occur when you show that it is not worth it for those people to hate. And the rest of the world looks at us and they're like, these are pretty easy people to mess with. I mean, it is really easy to mess with Jews in the diaspora specifically. And what are we doing about it? We do not have strong Jews. And it bothers me so much. Yes, we have the Jew in the subway wearing the kippah. I wear a kippah on the subway every single day. Yes, we have the Jew wearing a Magen David necklace. But man, we let so many things go. We let people call us kikes. We let people say whatever they want, that we're dirty Jews. People have called me dirty Jew. And we just let it go. Why is racism such a problem? Why are people so bandwagon against racism? Because, and of course, racism is wrong and nobody should ever support racism. But what Black Lives Matter was able to do was they told people we're not going to accept racism. We're not just going to say like, oh, most of the people are racist. What are we going to do about it? No, they were like, we are taking actions into our own hands and not going to allow you to do this. And the Jewish people need to wake up and be like, all right, enough is enough. We are not going to take anti-Semitism and let 2% of the American population, yet hate crimes are disproportionately 50% of hate crimes are against the Jewish people. Yet we represent 2% of the American population. Why? Because we take it and do nothing. There's an attack on a shul. What do we do about it? There's an attack on a school. Yeah, exactly, right? We're sending an email to our politicians.
Right.
What is that doing?
No, I agree with you. I hope that you're right about the diplomacy and the not messing with Israel. I am very fearful about that. I think that we are probably at the 40% mark when it comes to this war, really, if I'm, in my estimation, because
What do you mean by that? What's 40% what?
and that there's so much left to go with removing Hamas and
I
getting all the
disagree.
hostages back. And I'm concerned that this latest show is not actually showing that force. I'm concerned about that in Yudav Shomron, and I'm concerned about that in Lebanon as well, because obviously, yes, you have some amazing moments and amazing wins, but it's not all the way. And when we come to deterrence, I don't think that there's a Palestinian terrorist that's deterred in that way right now. I hope that we do get there. But when it comes to fighting on and standing up for Jews in the diaspora, I do agree with you. And I think that people do need to be proud and stand up. And it's essential. I also worry that if we don't remember what it is to be Jewish without being concerned about the external enemies, that's also a problem. And I feel that the best way to strengthen the response is through learning why we are the chosen people. Chosen being different, not being better, worse, this way. It's
I don't
different.
think we're better.
And people understanding what it means to be Jewish, I think that's extremely important. And it has to be taught and ingrained in one's soul. And the people that really have shown up, for example, you'll have a disproportionate amount of Chabad rabbis that have led trips to Israel and involved in helping soldiers at all over and hosting soldiers and everything. Because if you really understand the connection in Am Yisrael, you're going to act a little differently. And I think that it shows in their, Chabad involvement. And I think that that's, it's one way of approaching these issues. But yes, I do agree with you that there has to be a better way of presenting the Jewish people's story across the diaspora. And I just don't want soldiers to have to sit there, though, and say, why I'm not committing genocide. Here's 45 minutes on why I'm not committing genocide. I don't think we're going to win that way, because it's you're already on the defensive. They're framing the narrative. I would rather speak about the driving principles of the Jewish people, and from
Yeah.
there explain what's going on.
Yeah, I do think though that it's important to understand that when I'm having these debates with people generally and they're accusing the IDF of genocide or killing babies or whatever it is, I think it's really important to understand that I'm generally not speaking specifically to that person, right? I'm speaking to the 20 people who are surrounding us and listening to what my points are. Many of these people are either undecided or maybe largely siding with Israel but don't necessarily know all the points or whatever it is. And they hear us and they're like, okay, well, I actually didn't know that. Or, okay, that's pretty interesting. I didn't realize that the combatant ratio is the civilian to combatant ratio is lower than in any other war in modern history. And so like I think there are not necessarily to defend, right? Because like I agree with what you said. It shouldn't be a defense, right? Because then you're already on the defensive and you're already you're like an uphill battle. But I think that there is something to be said for probably most people have never spoken to an IDF soldier in the world, directly at least, and to show people the humanity of the IDF and to show people that this thing that they have been taught is equivalent to Nazi, right, is not at all what they think we are, right? Like I smile, I laugh, I cry just like anybody else. I'm a regular guy, like the most regular guy ever. And I also happen to be an IDF soldier who fought not just for Jews, but for Muslims, for Christians, and dare I say it, yes, even Palestinians, right?
I mean, of
Because
course, yeah.
I care about innocent people, and we care about innocent people.
I guess my when we talk about framing, I would just say, imagine if you gave a talk and it said, "Is Palestinian nationalism a death cult?" And the conversation is about the fact that there was going to be two states in 1948, and instead of accepting two states, the Arab nations decided to attack Israel. And if you look in the textbooks that have been funded by UNRWA, have been funded by the United Nations, you don't see Hebrew on the side of the Palestinian textbooks because they see a quote unquote Palestine taking all of the land of Israel and making it a Palestinian state. And what would that necessitate? That would necessitate the complete destruction of Jews in the state of Israel. We all know what the Arabs would have done to the Jews had they been victorious in the foundation
I
of a
don't disagree.
country. And
I
we
don't disagree.
know that when they say the Nakba and all this nonsense, that it's the Jewish people won, and this is how things shook out. But we know that if it had been the other way, it would have been a continuation of the Holocaust that had finished not 4 years prior. So the conversation is, look at how we try to behave morally in the face of a death cult. Why can't that be the topic of conversation? Why does it have to be,
It should be.
are we
That we
murdering
show
babies?
mercy, that we show mercy and escort Palestinians to safety, or we know that there are terrorists in a building and yet we're calling the building to get the civilians out before we bomb a building, right? Unprecedented things. And these are the things that people are shocked by and don't believe. And I want to highlight something, and I think it's really important, and it's that there is underlying, and kind of goes back to what I was saying before, but there's underlying anti-Semitism very, very prevalent in all of culture, especially in the diaspora, right? People just inherently don't like Jews. Inherently. And I would argue most people have negative views towards Jews. Whether they want to call it Israel or they want to call it Zionism, it is a masquerade for not liking Jews. It's that simple. And I've
Do you think people are born just hating Jews?
no, that's what I think
You're
it's the
saying it's a
opposite, right?
cultural phenomenon
It
that's
is a cultural
teaching it.
phenomenon that through generationally, people still do not like Jews. We are still in the back of people's heads, Christ killers. We are still in the back of people's heads, blood libel, whatever it is, eating Christian babies' blood. We are still those people, right? To them, we are still conspiring against the world. And I'm not saying that there's this like massive, every single person in the world hates Jews. I just think that there's this like underlying tone that if people are more willing to believe a terrorist organization that is designated by the United States of America and the EU more than they are willing to believe Jewish people who were just victim of the biggest slaughter of their people since the Holocaust, that tells you something. What does that tell you? They don't trust us, yet they're willing to trust a terrorist organization. If Al Qaeda was giving numbers on 9/11, why would people trust Al Qaeda? They wouldn't. But for Jews, for us to report on what's going on to our own people, it's not acceptable. And we're going to take Hamas's numbers. That to me is the epitome of not that we're just like the terrorists, but we are on this equal playing field with terrorists. And like, I'll say like, okay, where are you getting your number from, right? 45,000. They'll say, oh, the Gaza Ministry of Health. And I'm like, okay, well, you know that's run by Hamas. They're like, sure, it's run by Hamas. And I'm like, okay, well, we should also, if we're going to take Hamas's number, we should also be taking the IDF's number of the amount of terrorists killed. And they're like, no, we shouldn't. And I'm like, well, you just took a terrorist organization number, and that's being like really, really aggressive, right? It's probably less. And they're like, well, I don't trust the IDF. And I'm like, but you trust Hamas?
Yeah, but the number issue doesn't even address the moral aspect of it, which is you could say
Fine,
if
but
it's
it's this
45 or
idea.
40 or 35, it's still on the hands of Hamas, not on the hands of the IDF. So
100%. And
yeah.
that's something that's must be addressed, of course. But like, it's this idea that Israel / the Jewish people are on the same page as a terrorist organization, and even less, because they're willing to believe a terrorist organization before they're willing to believe the only democracy in the Middle East, in which Muslims have more political, social, economic, and sexual rights than any other place in the Middle East. So it's very worrisome to me that people genuinely don't believe us at baseline. They don't agree with Jews at baseline. That to me sounds like cultural anti-Semitism.
I think you made a pretty strong point for it, and I don't want to take up too much more.
Yeah, we could
Too
talk
much more
for we could
time.
talk forever.
Yeah.
Well, I'll pop back on a different time.
I just want to leave you with one thing here.
Go ahead.
I know you've lost a few friends and acquaintances through this war. Is there one in particular you can highlight for the audience and
Yeah,
share their
absolutely.
memory?
So my officer during my actual service, his name is Shavit Ben Moshe. He's a massive hero, but it's actually his brother, Ariel Ben Moshe. I'd like to highlight. Ariel was a MP, a captain in Sayeret Matkal, which is like the Delta Force of Israel, for those who don't know. And on October 7th, he was the first group to go in to Reim, where the festival was, to try and stop the terrorists who were infiltrated. He was immediately killed in Reim. I mean, to me, this is a story of just genuine spirit of the Jewish people in Israel. Shavit, my officer, finds out about his brother's death, and given that he is the last remaining child in the family, they have the option whether to go to war or not, right? There's a law in Israel that if you're the last remaining child after a child was killed, you have an option whether to go or not, because they don't want families to be childless. And Shavit calls his parents and says, like, you know, he tells them in that moment that their eldest son, Superman, if you can, like, literally, this guy's like Rambo in the best unit in the Israeli army as a captain, and he just fell in battle. And Shavit tells his parents, listen, Ariel was just killed, and I don't know what to do. Do I go to war or not? And he would be going pretty much down there to the same exact place, essentially, where his brother was just killed, to fight. And his parents' response to him was essentially, because Ariel was killed, Dafka, you have to go fight. And I think you think about like how Israel was built, and I guess the foundation at which our country was made, and it wasn't made by people born in Israel. Israel was made largely by immigrants post-Holocaust who came to Israel with zero. They didn't speak the language, and Milchemet Ha'atzmaut happens in 1948, the war, the Independence War, and these people who just lost their entire families in the Holocaust then went to sacrifice everything, and many died for this dream, this couple of days old dream of Israel existing, with no guarantee that Israel would exist, because they realized that without a country of our own, another Holocaust is just around the corner. And so I think, look at stories like that, where in our generation, October 7th is as extreme as anything. And their family, Shavit and Ariel's Zichron Lebracha, their family felt this was such a consequential time that even if it meant that their only children, their last child, would go and die to protect Israel, not that we want to sacrifice our kids, but we have to protect the Jewish people. We have to protect Israel. We have to fight, not because we want to, but because we have to. And I think that that is the story of our people. And I just wanted to share that. I think it's really
His
important.
neshama shev and aliyah, and I also want to
Yeah.
mention Erez Sagi, Hashem Yikom Damo, and that's how I actually first came across Ariel's story. I was in touch with Erez's mother since Unit 11741. We run a page called Remember the Hero IDF, and Erez fell in Tsuketan, and one of his best friends was Ariel. And there's a picture of them together and in course together, and then Ariel is wearing a shirt with Erez's face on it, and they are now buried next to each other.
Wow.
Um,
That gave me the chills.
yeah, it's crazy to
Well,
think about the level
yeah.
of sacrifice. And
Hashem Yikom Damam.
Amen. And yeah, and Erez's mother sent me a message saying you have to make sure you have Ariel up there, and she sent me the whole story, and we should be worthy of their sacrifice. They're amazing people.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Sam, thanks for coming on. Love to
Pleasure,
have you
man.
back soon, and
God willing.
be safe out there on the streets of New York.
Yalla, Am Yisrael Chai.
I'm Yisrael.
Take care.